They say family reunions are supposed to bring folks together, not rip them apart. But that summer afternoon in Tennessee, under those old oak trees, I learned that blood doesn't always mean respect. I was standing by the cooler, a paper plate in one hand and a sweating Coke can in the other, when my daughter's in-laws decided to make me their entertainment. The smell of barbecue and laughter hung in the air, until he opened his mouth. "Listen up, old man," barked Carl Henderson, his face red from beer and arrogance. "You've been mooching off this family long enough. Why don't you hand over that pension check and do something useful for once?" His wife snorted, loud enough for the kids to hear. "Look at him. Flannel shirt, same shoes since Nixon. Pathetic." Everyone froze. Even the birds went quiet. My grandkids stared. My daughter stared at the ground. I smiled, slow and hollow, pretending their words didn't pierce right through my chest. Inside, I felt something break, something that had been holding back for far too long. That was the last day I let anyone call me worthless, because that was the day karma took notes. The Tennessee sun was already mean that morning, bright, heavy, and unforgiving. Sweat clung to my collar before I'd even finished my first Coke. Kids were running wild between picnic tables, the air thick with the smell of barbecue and cheap cologne. From a distance, it looked like your usual family get-together. Folding chairs, paper plates, too much noise, and folks pretending they actually liked each other. But if you looked a little closer, you'd see the cracks. Polite smiles that hid judgment, laughter that carried more poison than warmth. That's what family reunions do best. They make you realize who's family and who's just pretending. I settled into a creaky lawn chair beside my old pickup. Its blue paint faded into something between memory and sky. My knees complained when I sat, the same way they'd done every summer since the mill closed. Still, I smiled. I'd earned those aches. Every creak in my bones was a receipt for the years I'd spent feeding a family, paying bills on time, keeping the lights on when the company downsized and the town went quiet. Sometimes I missed the rhythm of the machines, that deep hum that made you feel you belonged somewhere. Now, my days are quieter. Morning coffee on the porch, mowing a yard that grows slower each year, fixing little things just to keep my hands busy. I tell myself peace is a reward, not a punishment, though loneliness has a habit of creeping in like the evening humidity. Across the picnic tables, I watched Sarah arranging cupcakes with her mother-in-law, my only child, bright, careful with her mother's gentle eyes. She'd married into the Henderson family about 10 years back. They were what folks around here call comfortable. Big house on the hill, matching SUVs, the kind of people who say bless your heart when they mean the opposite. I'd learned to read that tone early. The Hendersons never said anything outright, not at first. It was always the little things. A glance at my flannel when everyone else wore polos. A polite smile that froze when I mentioned working shifts instead of owning shares. They'd pour me sweet tea with the same politeness you'd use feeding a stray dog. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't here for them. I was here for Sarah and the grandkids who still thought their grandpa hung the moon. From my chair, I could see them playing tag near the swing set, barefoot and loud, a blur of grass-stained joy. Watching them almost made the long drive worthwhile. Carl Henderson, Sarah's father-in-law, stood near the grill, holding court as usual. Big voice, bigger ego. He wore his money like cologne, thick and heavy enough to choke a room. Beside him, his wife Ruth fluttered like a sequined moth, fanning herself with a glossy magazine and laughing at every half-funny thing he said. They loved the sound of themselves almost as much as they loved reminding everyone else who paid for the steaks. I kept my head down, poking at my plate, pretending not to notice when Carl pointed his beer bottle my way. During another one of his stories, I'd been through enough reunions to know how this tune went. A little bragging, a little teasing, a few digs that cut deeper than they should. I could have stayed home. Truth be told, I'd thought about it. The drive was long, my back had been acting up, and I knew exactly how this crowd treated the man with calloused hands and a pension check instead of a stock portfolio. But Sarah had called me 3 times that week, her voice soft and hopeful. "Please come, Dad," she'd said. "The kids keep asking if Grandpa's coming." So here I was, sweating under the Tennessee sun, holding on to patience like a second skin. A breeze came through, carrying the smell of cut grass and charcoal. For a moment I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. The laughter, the chatter, even the country music from the portable speaker blended into something almost peaceful. Still, somewhere in the back of my mind, a small unease stirred. Maybe it was the way Carl's voice carried a little too loud, or how Ruth's laugh always followed mine, like an echo that mocked instead of joined in. I took another sip of my Coke and told myself I'd endure it. One more day of polite poison, one more afternoon of swallowing pride for Sarah's sake. What I didn't know was that before the sun set, that patience I'd worn for years would finally tear, and everything they thought they knew about me, about who held the real power in this family, would change forever. Carl was already parked beside the grill again, puffed up like a bullfrog telling fishing stories nobody asked to hear. When he spotted me, his grin spread slow. "Well, look who made it," he said. "You drive that old rust bucket all the way here without it falling apart?" He laughed before I could answer. My pickup sat 10 yards away, sun bleaching the hood, paint chipped, tires dusty. I'd kept that truck running through 2 recessions and a dozen Tennessee winters. It didn't shine, but it never quit. Kind of like me. I smiled. "Still gets me where I'm going." Carl slapped his knee. "Must be nice not caring how things look." Ruth joined in, carrying a bowl of potato salad the size of a watermelon. "Carl, don't tease him," she said in that syrupy tone. Then to me, "Bless your heart, it's good you're comfortable with simplicity. I couldn't live without air conditioning and satellite radio." Her perfume mixed with the smoke, sweet and cloying. I forced a small chuckle. Guess I'm old-fashioned that way. They turned away before my smile faded. That's how it always went. Tiny cuts hidden behind politeness. A word here, a glance there. Enough to sting, not enough to start a scene. At the table, Ruth began talking loud enough for the whole yard to hear. "We just closed on that place down in Sarasota," she said. "Right on the water. Carl says we deserve a little luxury after all our hard work." Then, eyes on me, she added, "Maybe next year we'll invite everyone down. Of course, travel can be expensive." People nodded politely. I kept my focus on the coleslaw. Inside, though, something twisted. I'd been saving for years, not for vacations, but for Sarah's kids' college. I'd rather see them free of debt than see the ocean again. That's how I was raised. You build something solid, even if no one claps when you're done. I remembered the first dinner I ever had with the Hendersons, back when Sarah brought her fiancé home. I'd walked into their brick mansion wearing the only suit I owned. Ruth looked me up and down like she was measuring the distance between acceptable and embarrassing. Carl had poured me a drink and said, "So, sir, what line of work are you in?" "Textile mill," I'd answered. He'd smiled too wide. "Honest labor, good for you." The way he said it made it sound like a compliment to a dog that finally sat. Years rolled by, and I watched Sarah bend herself to fit their world. Nice cars, charity luncheons, dinner photos where everyone looked perfect. I never said a word, just kept showing up when invited, shaking hands, being the quiet one in flannel among the suits. But what none of them knew was how many times I'd kept their pretty life from falling apart. The first time was when Carl's investment partner disappeared with 50 grand of company money. Carl had called me that night, voice shaking, begging for a short-term loan until he could sort things out. I wired him the cash the next morning, under a different name, so he could save face. He'd thanked me by pretending it never happened. Then Ruth's hospital stay, gallbladder surgery. Their insurance didn't cover half of it. Sarah was in tears, scared they'd lose their house. I took an advance on my pension, paid the remainder anonymously, and let Ruth believe her old friend from church had helped. I never told Sarah. Didn't want to make things awkward between her and her husband's family. Over the years, the numbers added up. Car payments, tuition checks for their boy when his grades tanked, even covering a bad loan they co-signed. Every time, I told myself I was doing the right thing. That kindness would come back around. But sitting there now, listening to them brag about their Florida condo while mocking the grease stains on my sleeves, that old belief started to sour. Their laughter slid under my skin like a splinter I'd ignored too long. Ruth drifted closer, refilling drinks. "You still living in that little house out by the highway?" she asked. "Yup." "Same one." She nodded, pity painted on her face. "Well, stability is important when you're older." Carl snorted. "Man sticks with what he knows. Ain't that right?" I could have fired back. Could have told them that the mortgage on my little house had been paid off 15 years ago while they were drowning in credit, but that's not my way. I just nodded, took another sip of my Coke, and let the silence hang heavy. Sarah caught my eye across the table, a quick, worried look, the same one she'd had as a little girl when she thought she'd disappointed me. I smiled to tell her it was fine, though it wasn't. The afternoon dragged. The heat thickened. Conversations blurred together. Talk of stocks, golf, and the Hendersons' charity gala in Nashville. Not once did anyone ask how I was doing, or if I needed a refill. When I finally stood to stretch my legs, Carl called after me. "Don't wander off too far, old man. We might start a collection to buy you a real shirt." Laughter followed, not loud but sharp. I walked away, slow and steady, past the cooler and toward the shade of the oaks. My heart thudded against my ribs, not from anger but from something older. Disbelief that after all these years of helping, of holding this family together from the shadows, I still meant nothing to them. I sat on the tailgate of my truck and looked out over the yard. The sunlight flickered through the branches, catching bits of dust in the air. Somewhere inside me, something hardened. Some folks mistake silence for weakness. They forget silence can also be the sound of a storm getting ready to break. By mid-afternoon, the Tennessee sun had turned vicious, beating straight down through the oak branches. The smell of grilled meat mixed with beer and sweat. Kids were still chasing each other around the tables, high on sugar and heat, their laughter cutting through the country music, humming from a Bluetooth speaker. Carl's voice rose above it all, booming, half-slurred, hungry for an audience. Every story he told got a little louder, every joke a little meaner. The cooler beside him was already half empty. "Hey, Ray!" he called across the yard. "Come on over here a minute, buddy." I should have stayed put, but habit had me answering when called. Old men like me are raised that way. He grinned when I reached him, a beer in one hand and that fake friendliness curling his lips. "Tell me something, you still pulling that pension check every month?" "Sure," I said quietly. He nodded, turned to the small circle of relatives around him. "Ain't it something? Government keeps paying him to sit on his porch all day. Meanwhile, some of us still work for a living." Laughter rippled, uneasy, polite, the kind people use when they're not sure if they should stop him. I felt the first crack of heat behind my ribs. "Carl," I said, steady, "you know I put in 40 years at that mill." He raised his can like a toast. "And what's that worth now? 40 years of grease stains and back pain? Tell you what, old-timer, you ought to hand that pension over to the next generation folks who can actually use it." The air seemed to shrink. Conversations faded. Even the cicadas went quiet. Ruth stepped in, giggling too loudly. "Oh, Carl, stop. You'll hurt his feelings." Then, softer but meant to be heard, "That flannel's got to be 20 years old. Probably still smells like the mill." A few chuckles floated around. She turned back to me with mock sympathy. "We're just teasing, Ray. You know we love having you here." I managed a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Sure you do." Across the yard, Sarah froze mid-step, a paper plate trembling in her hand. Her face flushed the color of her blouse. "Dad," she whispered when she came closer. "Please just let it go." I nodded. "I'm fine." But my throat felt raw, like I'd swallowed gravel. Carl wasn't done. "Hell, Ruth, maybe we should take up a collection. Get the man a decent pair of shoes." He pointed down at my work boots, cracked but clean. "They've seen better decades, huh?" More laughter, this time freer, louder, because he'd given them permission. Someone muttered, "Poor guy." And another voice whispered, "He really should learn to take a joke." The sound of it all pressed against my ears until it blurred into a dull roar. I could feel my heartbeat in my palms, my breath shortening. It was the same feeling I'd had years ago when the mill siren screamed for the last time. Shock, disbelief, a hollow ringing that told me something was ending. Through the haze, I saw my youngest grandson standing a few feet away, clutching a red balloon. His little brow was furrowed. "Grandpa," he asked, voice small, "why are they mad at you?" That hit harder than any insult. I crouched down, forced a shaky smile. "They're just being loud, kiddo. Don't you worry about it." He nodded, uncertain, and ran off toward the swings. Carl chuckled. "You see that? Even the kid knows when to run." I straightened slowly, every vertebra screaming. "Enjoy your beer, Carl." He waved his hand like he was dismissing a waiter. "Lighten up, old man. We're family. Can't you take a little fun?" Behind him, Ruth whispered something, and they both laughed again. I looked at Sarah one last time. She couldn't meet my eyes. Her husband stood beside her, jaw tight, pretending to be fascinated by the grill. That hurt most of all. The humiliation burned through me like sun on bare skin. Steady, merciless. I thought about the years I'd worked double shifts so Sarah could have a better life. About the nights I'd fixed the Hendersons' problems in silence. Every debt I'd covered. Every lie I'd let them keep. And here I was. A punchline in their backyard circus. My hands trembled. Not from anger, but from the effort it took to stay calm. If I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure what would come out. Maybe every secret I'd buried. Maybe just the sound of breaking. I set my empty can on the cooler lid. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "Think I'll get some air." Nobody stopped me. As I walked away, the noise behind me swelled again. Laughter, music, someone calling for more ribs. To anyone watching, it probably looked like nothing had happened. Just another old man stepping out of the sun for a bit. But inside, something was shifting. Slow, certain, dangerous. The kind of shift that happens right before thunder rolls. I reached the shade of the oaks and let the breeze hit my face. My shirt stuck to my back, my heart thumped heavy. I stared at the picnic from a distance. The people I'd spent years quietly protecting, laughing like nothing had changed. In that moment, I understood. They would never see me unless I made them look, and soon enough they would. That night, the laughter still echoed in my head long after I got home. The road back was dark and empty, the kind of darkness that swallows sound. My headlights cut through it like two tired eyes. And when I finally pulled into my driveway, the crickets were louder than the engine. I didn't bother turning on the porch light. I just sat there, the old wood creaking beneath me, staring out at the quiet field that used to be a corn patch before the mill went under. The moon hung low, fat and orange, watching like it wanted to say something but couldn't. My late wife, Mary, used to sit in the same spot with her cup of tea. She'd hum low tunes when the world felt too heavy. "Patience," she'd always tell me. "The Lord sorts out fools better than we ever could." I used to believe her tonight. Her voice felt miles away. I took a deep breath, the kind that hurts going in. "They've mistaken my silence for surrender, Mary," I said softly to the night. "And I think it's time I reminded them what patience really looks like." The screen door groaned as I went inside. The house smelled faintly of dust and cedar. Everything was just as she'd left it. Her knitted blanket draped across the couch, the photograph of Sarah as a little girl on the mantel, all bright eyes and missing teeth. For a long moment I stood there, letting the memories roll over me until they stung. Then I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. The bulb flickered when I pulled the chain. The air up there was thick and warm, full of old secrets and cardboard boxes stacked like tombstones of another life. I knelt beside one marked Taxes 2008 to 2015 and pulled it open. Inside were piles of yellowed envelopes, check stubs, receipts, a lifetime of careful keeping. I'd never been one to throw things away. Paper tells stories, and I've always liked to keep mine handy. One by one, I opened folders, property records, medical bills, handwritten notes, and then old bank statements. I ran a finger over the faded ink and felt something tighten in my chest. These weren't just my records. Some bore the Hendersons' names, transactions I'd made for them over the years. I remembered the first one clear as day. Carl had shown up at my house once, back when Sarah and Tom were still newlyweds. He'd been pale, sweating through his expensive shirt. "Ray, old buddy," he'd said, voice shaky. "I just need a little help. A business thing gone sideways. I'll pay it back next month." I'd known it was a lie even then, but he was family now. So I wired him the money through a mutual friend's account, kept no paper trail linking it to me. I smiled bitterly at the thought. A man like Carl Henderson never thought he'd need a mill worker to save his reputation. The next folder was a hospital invoice. Ruth's gallbladder surgery, almost 15 grand after insurance. She'd bragged about how her church friends had stepped up. Her church friend had been me. Another envelope. A car loan notice. Sarah's husband, Tom, had taken out a second loan behind her back for a new truck. When it defaulted, I covered it quietly to keep her from finding out. I could still remember the relief on his face when I handed him the check he'd called me a good man. Then a week later, he'd gone right back to calling me old-fashioned and slow. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, surrounded by the ghosts of my own generosity. The numbers were staggering. Thousands upon thousands of dollars, money I could have used for repairs, for travel, for a bit of comfort in my old age. Instead, I'd handed it away to people who now called me a burden. I pulled out another box, smaller and heavier. Inside was a tin folder Mary had labeled "Important." The handwriting made my chest ache. Inside were neatly folded checks, copies of every anonymous payment I'd made. I ran my fingers across the names and dates, the looping signatures, Vegas credit accounts, a mortgage payment, even tuition bills for their son. Piece by piece, my past lined up in front of me like evidence at a trial. All those years I'd believed silence was noble, that it made me the better man. Now it just felt like chains I'd forged myself. I leaned back against a trunk and laughed quietly. It wasn't a happy laugh, more like disbelief spilling out. "You called me a leech," I said to the dusty air. "Yet I was your lifeline." Outside, thunder grumbled low across the horizon. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe not, but it felt like a nod from somewhere higher up. I gathered the papers into neat stacks, one for each of their debts. I labeled them carefully with a pen. Carl, Vegas loans. Ruth, hospital and credit. Tom, truck and tuition. Each sheet slid into a manila folder, deliberate as a prayer. When I was done, I sat there staring at the piles. They didn't look like revenge yet, just facts. But facts, when shown to the right eyes, can be sharper than any blade. I switched off the attic light, tucked the folders under my arm, and made my way down the creaking stairs. The house was dark except for the glow of the porch light filtering through the screen. I poured myself a glass of sweet tea, sat back in my chair, and listened to the night hum. For the first time all day, the humiliation in my chest began to fade, replaced by something colder, steadier. It wasn't anger anymore. It was purpose. "All right, Mary," I whispered, watching lightning dance behind the trees. "Let's see how patience looks when it wears my face." Morning light spilled through the blinds, sharp and clean after a night of thunder. The storm had rolled out before dawn, leaving behind the smell of wet dirt and pine. I sat at the kitchen table with a stack of folders spread across the surface, my coffee cooling beside them. Each folder bore a name written in my careful hand. Carl, Ruth, Tom. Neat, simple, deliberate. For the first time in years, I didn't feel old. I felt awake. I spent that whole morning sorting every piece of paper into order. Copies of checks, wire transfers, loan notices, hospital bills. I made duplicates, then duplicates of the duplicates. The small hum of the printer filled the house like music. With each page that slid out, I felt lighter, as if the weight of all those quiet years was finally shifting off my shoulders. By noon, I'd written small notes on every copy, short, factual explanations in block letters. Paid March 2009 to cover Carl Henderson's gambling debt $40,000. Paid April 2014. Ruth Henderson hospital bill $15,782. Paid August 2018. Truck loan for Tom Anderson $23,600. No emotion, no accusation, just truth on paper. I didn't want revenge through shouting. I wanted silence to do the heavy lifting this time. When everything was organized, I called my old friend, Jerry Lawson. We'd worked side by side at the mill before he'd moved into banking. Now he was retired, just like me, spending his days fishing and doing small favors for folks who still trusted his word. He picked up on the second ring. "Ray," he said, voice still warm and gravelly. "Ain't heard from you since the mill reunion. Got a little paperwork I need a hand with," I said. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "You never call unless something big's cooking. Bring it over." By the time I reached his place on Maple Drive, the sun was high, heat rolling off the pavement. Jerry's porch smelled like tobacco and lemon oil. He poured us both coffee and squinted at the folders spread across his dining table. "Lord Ray," he muttered, flipping through the papers. "This is a hell of a ledger." "Just debts repaid," I said evenly. "Only thing missing is acknowledgement." He whistled low. "And you kept all this quiet? For over a decade." He leaned back, studying me. "You planning to take this to court?" I shook my head. "No, Jerry, just to a picnic." That got him laughing so hard he nearly spilled his cup. "You always did have a flair for the quiet strike." He notarized every page, stamping them one after another, the sound like a slow heartbeat. When he was done, he slid the folders back toward me and said, "Whatever you're fixing to do, make sure it's clean. Truth's got power, but it bites if you swing it wrong." "I know," I said. "It's not about hurting him. It's about letting the truth breathe." Back home, I tucked the signed copies into a thick envelope, then sat back in my recliner. The hum of the ceiling fan mixed with the faint ticking of the wall clock. For once, my house felt alive again. The next few days were a quiet rehearsal. I went through the documents over and over, refining the order, practicing what I might say. I didn't want rage to cloud it, just clarity. Each night I'd fall asleep hearing Carl's voice in my head, mocking, laughing. But instead of pain, it only sharpened my focus. I made sure Sarah would be there too. When she called midweek to ask if I was coming to the Hendersons' annual summer barbecue, I kept my voice calm. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. She sounded relieved. "Good. Dad, about last time, Carl was drinking too much. Sarah," I interrupted softly. "It's fine. Let's just have a nice day." She hesitated. "You sure?" "Sure as the sunrise." When we hung up, I stared out at my front yard, the mower lines neat and straight, the flag fluttering lazily in the afternoon heat. Everything felt deliberate, like the world was waiting for something to settle. On Friday, I ironed a clean shirt, the same one Mary used to say made me look presentable. I polished my boots till the scuffs faded. No more flannel this time. Let them see I hadn't withered, only waited. Saturday came bright and sticky. The drive to the park took 30 minutes, but it felt shorter somehow. Familiar. When I pulled up, the same oak trees loomed over the picnic tables, leaves whispering in the wind like gossip. People were already gathered, kids shouting, music thumping. Carl's laugh cut through it all, bold and careless. I parked, stepped out, and felt the sun on my back. My pulse was steady. As I walked toward the tables, I could almost hear Mary's voice again. Soft, approving, "Patience, Ray. Let them reveal themselves, then show them what truth looks like." Ruth waved her jeweled hand when she saw me. "Well, look who's here." "You cleaned up nice," Carl grinned. "Guess we embarrassed him into upgrading that wardrobe, huh?" Their laughter barely touched me. It was background noise now. I set my envelope down beside the dessert tray, careful, almost reverent. The smell of peach cobbler hung in the air. People chatted, passed plates, poured drinks. Time stretched thin and quiet. My hand brushed against the edge of the envelope. The paper inside seemed to hum like a live wire. This time, I thought, I'll be the one holding court. For years, I'd been the quiet man in the corner, the one folks forgot when they counted heads. Not anymore. The next words I spoke would rewrite every story they'd told about me. I looked around at the faces, my daughter, my grandchildren, the Hendersons glowing in their borrowed pride. The sun flickered through the oak leaves, the same tree line that had watched me bow my head in shame not long ago. Sometimes, I murmured under my breath, the sweetest justice is served under the same shade tree that once saw your humiliation. The wind picked up, rustling the branches above, like even the trees were leaning in to listen tomorrow they would. The Tennessee sun was back to doing its cruel work, bright and merciless above the same oak trees that had once witnessed my humiliation. But this time, the air felt different, charged somehow, like it knew something was coming. The same folding chairs, the same cheap paper plates, the same laughter bouncing across the park. Yet I wasn't the same man sitting under those trees anymore. Carl Henderson was already holding court by the grill, wearing his bright blue polo and that smirk that never quite left his face. His wife Ruth sat nearby, sunglasses perched on her nose, legs crossed like a queen waiting for applause. Sarah was helping set out dishes with her usual careful smile, trying to hold her family together like she always did. When they spotted me walking up, Carl waved his spatula in mock cheer. "Well, look who's back for round 2, he called. "Didn't think we'd scared you off last time, Ray?" A few folks chuckled politely. Ruth leaned over and said just loud enough, "I told you, Carl, he's tougher than he looks. Old men are like weeds. They just keep popping back up." I smiled, calm as the surface of a still pond. "Good to see you too, Ruth," I said. "You both look prosperous." She preened a little. "Oh, you know us. We work hard for everything we've got." I nodded. "I know you do." No one saw the envelope tucked neatly under my arm. The hours passed like a slow play. Kids ran around tossing footballs. Someone turned up an old country tune on the speaker. I chatted with a few cousins, helped Sarah carry a tray, laughed when my grandkids showed me their new slingshots. I wanted everything to look normal, because when the storm hits, it always hits harder after the calm. When dessert time rolled around, the crowd gathered near the tables again. Someone brought out pies and cobblers, and the smell of sugar and cinnamon filled the air. I waited until everyone had a plate or cup in hand. Even the Hendersons had loosened up, flushed from the heat and beer, laughing too loud. That's when I cleared my throat. The sound was small, but it carried conversations faltered. Heads turned. "Before dessert," I said, "I'd like to share something." Carl laughed. "Oh, Lord, Ray's got a speech." "Not a speech," I replied gently. "Just a few words of gratitude." That earned me a few polite nods. I placed the manila envelope on the table beside the peach cobbler. The paper made a soft thunk against the wood. "See," I began, "I've been thinking a lot since our last gathering under these same trees. I realized I'd forgotten to thank a few folks for the memories." Carl's smirk faltered a little. "You're welcome, I guess." "Not you, Carl. Not yet." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, uneasy and curious. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first set of papers, each neatly labeled, notarized, and dated. The black ink looked sharp against the white. I unfolded the first page. "This here," I said, reading slow and steady, "is a bank statement from 2009. That was the $30,000 I paid to clear a gambling debt you racked up in Las Vegas, Carl. You remember? You told your wife you'd been on a business trip. I used a mutual friend's account so it wouldn't come back to you. Didn't want to embarrass the family." Gasps, whispers. Ruth's face went pale beneath her makeup. "That's a lie," she snapped. Voice too high, I turned to her calmly. "Oh, it's not. Jerry Lawson, some of you know him. He notarized these yesterday. Every transaction lines up with your credit records. Would you like me to pass them around?" Someone near the back muttered, "Good Lord." Carl's face flushed a deep, violent red. "You've got no right." "No right?" I said quietly. "Maybe. But I had the decency once. That's why none of you ever heard about it. Until today. I picked up another sheet, unfolded it with the same slow precision. This next one's from 2014. $15,782. That was Ruth's hospital bill when she needed emergency surgery. She told everyone her church covered it. A few heads turned toward her. Ruth's lips trembled. That was anonymous charity. It was, I agreed. I just figured it was time the donor introduced himself. A hush fell over the crowd. You could hear the cicadas buzzing in the trees. I went on, not with anger, not with drama, just steady, factual truth. This here's 2018. Tom, my son-in-law, took out a second loan for a truck he couldn't afford. I paid that off too, so Sarah wouldn't find out. $23,600. He promised to make it right. Never did. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. Her husband looked like he wanted the ground to open up beneath him. Each word fell like a stone in a still pond, rippling through the family that had once pitied me. I folded my last paper, looked around, and said softly, "Over the years, I gave close to $150,000. Quietly, willingly." I folded my last paper, looked around, and said softly, "Over the years, I gave close to $150,000. Quietly, willingly, to keep this family standing. While you folks called me a burden, I was the one holding the walls up." Carl finally broke, stepping forward. "You think this makes you better than us? You're just trying to humiliate us." I tilted my head. "No, Carl. I'm just returning the favor. Only difference is, I brought proof." Someone near the table whispered, "He paid their debts?" Another voice said, "All that talk about him being useless." The air thickened, shame bleeding through the crowd like smoke. Ruth's hands were shaking. Her lipstick smudged as she turned to Carl. "You told me those debts were handled." Carl muttered something about business losses, but no one was listening anymore. The same people who'd once laughed at me were now whispering behind their hands, eyes sharp and judgmental, toward them. I gathered the papers back into the envelope and tucked it under my arm. "And you called me a leech?" I said quietly. Funny how parasites forget who fed them. The silence that followed was heavy. Sarah stood frozen, tears streaking her cheeks. My grandkids stared wide-eyed, confused but sensing the shift. I looked at Sarah and gave her a small, steady smile. "You've got nothing to be ashamed of, sweetheart. Just remember, kindness isn't weakness. It's just patience waiting for truth." I turned toward the picnic tables, toward the field, toward the road that led home. Behind me, voices began to rise, sharp, frantic. The Hendersons arguing, relatives closing in, demanding explanations. But I didn't look back. The oak leaves rustled overhead. The same trees that had once shaded my humiliation now whispering like witnesses to justice. The smell of barbecue was gone now, replaced by the faint tang of rain on the wind. As I walked away, a single thought crossed my mind. Quiet and clean. Sometimes, you don't need to raise your voice to make the world listen. Sometimes karma just needs a little help finding her cue. By Monday morning, the story had already grown legs and run through the whole county. Small towns don't need newspapers. They've got porch talk, barbershop whispers, and church potlucks. By sunrise, every diner booth and gas station counter in rural Tennessee was buzzing with one topic: the Hendersons. Folks said Ruth had been seen crying in her car outside the bank. Carl hadn't shown up at the hardware store where he bragged about managing investments. Someone else claimed their oldest boy pulled his kids out of school for the week, too ashamed to show his face. I didn't take joy in it. Not exactly. But I can't say it didn't feel like balance finding its way home. By Wednesday, the rumor mill said the Hendersons were selling off their vacation property in Florida, then their lake cabin. Then, finally, the big house with the fancy porch swing Ruth used to brag about. Debts, taxes, unpaid loans. They'd come due faster than they ever expected. Karma doesn't send reminders. It just collects. I stayed quiet through it all. Went about my chores, fixed the loose shutter on my porch, and took my truck down to Jerry's for coffee like I always did. The way people looked at me, though, well, that was new. Before, they used to nod politely, half smiling like they were humoring the old man who'd overstayed his time. Now, they tipped their hats. They stopped to shake my hand. They asked how I was doing, called me Mr. Ray again instead of old fella. Funny how the truth can polish a man's reputation cleaner than any sermon. That Saturday, Sarah came by. I saw her car pull into the drive slow, hesitant, like she wasn't sure she belonged there anymore. She stepped out wearing jeans and a gray sweater, her hair tied back like she used to when she was little, and helped Mary bake pies. Her eyes were red before she even said a word. "Dad," she whispered when she reached the porch. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Come on up." She hesitated, then climbed the steps and stood there for a moment, fidgeting with her sleeves. Her voice cracked. "I didn't stand up for you that day. I just froze. I was scared they'd cut us off, scared of making things worse. And all this time you—" Her words tangled into tears. I set down my glass of sweet tea and reached for her hand. "Sarah," I said gently, "you don't owe me an apology." She shook her head. "Yes, I do. You helped them, and me, and I let them tear you apart in front of everyone." I smiled softly. Sometimes, letting people fall is the only way they learn to stand. She covered her mouth, tears spilling again. "I'm so sorry, Dad." I gave her hand a small squeeze. "Don't be. You've got a good heart. You just trusted the wrong ones to have one too." We sat there in silence for a while, the porch creaking beneath us, the cicadas humming in the trees. After a long moment, I said, "How are the kids holding up?" "They're confused," she said, wiping her eyes. "They heard things at school, but they're proud of you, Dad. They keep saying, 'Grandpa's a hero.'" That made me laugh. A quiet, warm sound I hadn't heard from myself in a long time. "Hero's a strong word, sweetheart. I just stopped letting the wrong people write my story." Later, when she'd gone, I went back inside and opened the old lockbox under my bed. Inside were the savings I'd built over the years, money I'd kept untouched, living small so others could live loud. This time I decided it was going somewhere that mattered. By Monday, 3 new accounts were opened at the local bank. College funds for each of my grandkids. Every dollar came from my savings and my pension, both of which, despite what Carl liked to believe, were still in my name and untouched. When the banker handed me the receipts, she smiled and said, "You're a good man, Mr. Ray." I nodded, just doing what's right. Over the next few weeks, I noticed small changes everywhere I went. The mailman waved instead of just honking. The pastor at church made a sermon about quiet dignity. Even the grocery clerk, the one who used to rush me through checkout, took her time to chat. Respect's a funny thing. It vanishes fast, but when it comes back, it lands like sunlight after rain. And me? I just kept to my rhythm. Mowed the grass, fixed what was broken, watched the seasons tilt toward autumn. One evening, I found myself back under those same oak trees at the park. The air was cooler now, the leaves starting to bronze. Kids were running across the grass again. Different faces this time, but the same laughter. I sat on a bench with my cane resting across my knees, watching the world move on. The picnic table still stood there, weathered but steady, like witnesses who'd seen everything and said nothing. I looked up at the largest oak, the one where I'd stood that day, the one that had shaded both my humiliation and my redemption, and smiled. You see, the thing about roots is, they don't care about the noise above them. They just keep growing deeper, steadier, holding everything up while no one's paying attention. That's what age teaches you. Quiet doesn't mean weak. It just means you've learned to wait until the right wind blows. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and listened to the rustle of leaves overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. A sound that hit the same corner of my heart that Mary's voice used to. And as the sun dipped low, painting everything gold, I said the words out loud. Not bitter, not proud, just true. They said I was a burden. Turns out, I was the foundation, and when they tried to bury me, they only dug their own graves. The wind carried it off through the trees, soft as a hymn, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely, peacefully still.